This is Recovery Machine News. And hello, everybody. I'm Nathan, and we've got Corey over there. We're going to do we're going to try a different angle here. We're going to try a news type presentation. So we're going to do a couple stories that are in the news, and then we're going to Corey's going to bring us up to date on his personal story as far as where he's at with his work related kind of back and forth. And we'll see how it works. I think we'll try to keep it, relatively short and sweet. And yeah, I think it'll give us an opportunity to maybe let you know more about, if we do a little bit of work digging things out of the news and putting together a couple pieces of information that maybe you don't have time to do, that might be useful for you. And it's useful for us as well, because it kind of makes us keep up to date with what's coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Corey, you were out in Tofino, you say?
I was.
Wedding? Yeah.
Yep. Out in Tofino at a wedding, and it was spectacular there. For anyone who hasn't been there, it's just one of the most beautiful places on earth, I would venture to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though it was rainy, it was still beautiful.
Absolutely.
Right on. So, the last time I think we talked about this, when we talked about your job situation, the union was kind of, they were wanting you to sort of hang on to the way things were and sort of see what happened next, kind of take a wait and see approach. And since then, you've had some developments. Can you tell us what transpired and what direction you're headed in here?
Yeah. So also, when our the last Corey update episode, it also ended with me declining the position that was offered to me for the accommodation, and I because of my declining of that offer, I was deemed to have resigned. I was sort of resigned by force, if you will, or resigned by, in my opinion, the lack of a more viable option than that.
Right. Even though the option was pretty rough. Like I think you were looking at an hour commute either way. It would be a desk job type situation.
Yeah. Full-time hours.
Yeah. Kind of all the things that you were looking to avoid. You've got the younger son. You don't want full-time because of that. And you certainly don't want to do 2 hours worth of commuting a day because of that. Well, who does, but
yeah, yeah, absolutely. But that was where I was left. But like you said, after that decision was made by me, the decision and the message from the union was, let's sort of wait and see what happens next, and keep my practicing license, keep my registration with the union, and just kind of see what's out there. However, and my case has been kind of interesting because the timing has been so critical at various points in my story, and the change that was coming in the next couple of weeks here was that I was going to have to self-pay for my monitoring agreement. And there are, for our listeners who don't know, there are very few employers in our province who are willing to pay for the monitoring for nurses or whoever the safety sensitive professional is. A lot of employers put the onus back on the individual, and it's quite costly.
Yeah, we're talking $600 to $1,000 a month, something
correct.
Like that. Yeah,
correct. So, depending on what. So if it's just about urine or blood samples or hair samples, that's one thing. If you require a little sort of at-home breathalyzer that you blow into 3 or 4 times a day, there's an additional cost there. So that was not my case, but it becomes very expensive. And so as of, in 2 or 3 weeks time, I was going to have to start to self-pay for that because I had declined that position that was offered to me. I was no longer attached to that employer, and my union had paid for my monitoring for a year. And now who's going to pay for it? Workers' compensation does not require the monitoring as a part of their direction or part of their agreement. So it was back onto me to pay for. And while I was not working, that was going to cost me $500 a month. And the understanding was that once I got back to work, that was going to go up to $675 a month. And this was if I found a nursing job. And as we got into in our last episode with Sheldon Wilson, at the stage of my career that I'm at, after being through everything that I've been through, that's not an easy task to find a nursing job, or to find a nursing job with an employer who's willing to pay for the monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, you could, it's not like there's lots of jobs out there, but what the problem is when you get into these monitoring contracts, often they start with significant restrictions in what you are and aren't allowed to do.
Correct.
One of them being the ability to work in an area where narcotics are being used or stored, or like you had that one job opportunity and they declined that just because you would be out in the public where somebody might have drugs, yeah. Which is, that's kind of next level, over the top monitoring. What do you call them? Well, whatever your components of your contract are, clauses, I guess, but
yeah,
it's a little intense, right? So
and restrictive,
yeah.
Yeah. And so there's the actual details of the monitoring, which is submitting urine samples randomly twice a month, logging in to the computer every day to see, logging all of the participation in groups, logging in my counseling, all of that stuff. But then there's also the consent agreement, which is through the governing body. So these things are all restrictive. I don't deny that there's some value to these things to keep me out of the general vicinity of a narcotic, say.
Yeah.
That said, it doesn't account for all of the other things that I'm doing that keep me safe because of myself. Like we've talked about before, I go to the grocery store now, and all of the grocery stores in my community sell wine, and I don't go and try to take a bottle of wine and drink it. Like that's my own choice there. So these things are, they are restrictive, and they would really limit the possible job directions that I could go within nursing for the next 3 to 4 years is the usual agreement for nurses. And mine was a 4-year agreement.
The rare 4-year, eh?
Yeah. So to get to the point, my decision was, again, particularly after some of our more recent discussions and our more recent episodes, and this last episode with Sheldon, and this has been something that I've been mulling over for well over a year. And in fact, when I think about it, a year and a half. I think of the first 2 weeks of being off work, I knew that it was coming to this, to the fact that I needed to give up my nursing license.
So there was a part of you back then that suspected that your career was over.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I remember, distinctly having the conversation with my parents in my living room saying, I think this is it. Like I knew, I had a hunch that it was going to be restrictive and that I wouldn't have a lot of options, but I also really felt like it had all of the contributing factors of stress and trauma in the workplace, and the unhealthy nature of the job, and the things about myself that I wasn't working on. It all kind of came together into this storm. And I already was thinking at the very beginning, what would walking back into that be like for me? So it was something, but I wanted to be patient with it. I wanted to really mull that over. I wanted to see what the system and how I could kind of navigate that, and if there was going to be some doors that were still open. As in the last update of mine, there were no doors open.
Well, I will say that I've never seen anybody get into this situation and navigate it with such clarity and such a rational, healthy approach. There were times where you were very, very frustrated in those disciplinary meetings. Those can get really kind of heated and weird. And I think both of yours definitely were. And I think a lot of people would have reacted differently. Most people, I believe, would have reacted differently based on what I've seen. I mean, you were really in against somebody there who, for whatever reason, many times it's if you look deeper into these people's pasts, who have these people who, it's almost like they have a willingness to be ignorant about the condition of having suffering from any kind of addictive behavior. And if you look at, I bet you if you looked at that individual's past, he's probably lost a family member. Maybe it could be something, it could be his dad even, or somebody close to him was affected by it. I've seen that where people get angry, and then instead of looking deeper into the problem, they shut down and put up a kind of shield. And whenever they see it, they look to stamp it out. Right. And that kind of, from what I was seeing, and I was paying quite a bit of attention to your back and forth and stuff like that, it really looked like this individual was it just making things more difficult than they had to be for no apparent reason. And this is what happens. You run into these people. Some people are very empathetic. They want to try their best to make things easier. Others don't. Just the way it is. But excuse me, the way you handled that situation was pretty remarkable. And I think there was an opportunity even after where you could have fought harder if you wanted to, and you could have won. Like I have no doubt that if you wanted to, you could have taken them right to the end and beat them that way. But you didn't, because you were wise enough to see that at that point you weren't just saying that you were putting your recovery first and all that kind of nonsense. You actually understood what it meant and how much more your emotional mental health would mean to you personally and those who rely on you, like your son and your parents and significant other.
Yeah. Like I think, first of all, thank you. I think that I had worked too hard to not pay attention to the lessons that I had learned. And if I had have, for me, and I admire the people who persevere and then do get back to work, and if it's able to work for them. I don't want to say that this is the only way to go, because I really believe that you and I have I think we've done a good job of trying to portray the fact that there are many different roads to take.
Yeah,
but it's such a personal thing. And for me, like asking myself, how does this really work for me? Or how does this work for my recovery? But how does this piece of information sit? Or how does this potential decision sit? And so when I came to the fact, okay, now at the end here, I'm now going to have to pay for my own monitoring. I'm going to be paying $675 a month to be restricted in the areas I can work, to potentially not even be able to work with people anymore, which I really, in thinking about my career in nursing, the thing that I kept coming back to was that was the most, at times a very stressful part of the job, but it was also the most redeeming part of the job, was like that human interaction of reaching people and meeting people where they were at and helping to make people feel better or build them up or whatever it may be. That was the redeeming part of the job. So to be sitting behind a desk at a computer, not having human contact, having to pay for my own monitoring, that was the choice of the governing body, and an addictions doctor, that didn't sit with me. And there was no autonomy in that. There was no like sort of personal agency in that. And so it just became clearer and clearer and clearer. And, but you kind of then have to there's a leap that has to be done in that, where you have to like actually take a deep breath in and make that move. And that is a scary part of the process.
It is a lot harder to do it than to say it. And I've done these, I've made a couple big leaps of faith in my life where there was a lot on the line. I had no idea how it was going to turn out. And I made it through just by sheer luck or, whatever, good fortune. But I think with your career in particular, it's people are up against two things. They get complacent, depending on how long they've been in their whatever particular profession. And it's almost like, when you get, I don't know if you're into investing at all, but some people, a trap that you can get in when you're investing is you put a lot of time and effort in a stock, and you put money in, you take money out. Every time you interact with that stock, you're actually building its value up in your mind in a way that is not in line with what it's really worth. Right. If you know what I mean, it's time invested. So you're not just quitting your job. You're like, oh, I put in all this time in school. What about all this? And so that's that one factor. Then there's the identity factor. Are you strong enough to just say, look, I'm more than this. I'm not just a healthcare professional. I can go do whatever the hell I want. Those are rational thoughts, but it's hard for people to, like, I've tried, I've used half measures basically, and I've kind of tapered my pharmacy down to what I can stand. But I don't know, man, I admire, you saw the writing on the wall. And honestly, I think we've talked about this before, the danger of going back into that place. When you're monitored, okay, that's very helpful. Maybe you're on Suboxone, they're starting to allow that. That's also helpful. Yep. But man, it doesn't mean that you're safe forever. And it is a very dangerous, especially right now, a dangerous place to work. And it's really hard on your mental health as well, even if you're doing everything right.
It is. And, I think that going back to that piece about identity, regardless of what the profession is, nursing is certainly one that has, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of personal identity that becomes attached to that, where it runs into every facet of your life, where people and loved ones and anyone who knows that you're a nurse or a healthcare professional will ask you questions or run things by you, and there's pride in that, and there's identity in that. But to me, the actual danger of the identity being attached to that is that self-esteem and self-worth is attached to that, and this whole thing, and even staying in it, even if I were to suck it up and do a desk job, and to do something that an avenue of nursing that was not my truth, not my passion or my interest even. But if it was like just saying, okay, well, at least I'm still this nurse, and then I get through it. That 4 years of monitoring and that 4 years of being under the thumb of the recovery machine, there's a toll that takes on our self-esteem and on our self-worth. And and I've heard this from other professionals, and I'm sure you have too, Nathan, where and Kinnan Ross said the same thing in our interview with her, that the monitoring was almost harmful, and it kind of keeps you down. It kind of has an ability to rub your nose in it. And recovery should be about building ourselves up and holding ourselves up with what we've learned, ideally. And that sort of keeping us down, I think, is harmful. Now, again, I know that for some it works and it's effective, but that had to be weighed out for me.
Absolutely. And yeah, of course it takes a toll, and depending on the person, they're either going to accept that as part of the deal and, chalk it up as a negative, but okay, you get used to it. By the end of it, it's not such a big deal. But I think it depends on how much you have yourself propped up. Right. If your identity is propped up by a lot of these external, like your career, whatever, how many letters you have behind your name, these types of things, to me, all that has always been nonsense. I don't understand how people equate. sure, they can equate academic excellence or skill in a specific field, and that's really cool.
Yep.
But it's not all what you are. I mean, there's so many facets of being a human being, and to put everything into that whatever field you're in, and then have your entire world, sitting on this precipice, waiting, waiting for somebody to kick the leg out. I don't know. I understand why people have a problem with it for sure, but luckily, I think in my case, that part wasn't as big of an issue. There's actually no way I was going back without monitoring. I think is the only redeeming. It's the only thing of value. But of course, it could be done way cheaper and way
for sure.
I mean, it doesn't have to be as ridiculous as it is, and there's a way to do it, I believe, that doesn't require you to have your face smushed in your mess over.
I think so too.
Again.
I think so too.
We have the technology. Like, it's a shame, but I see a lot of positives in the future, and hopefully we'll get there.
Absolutely. And just the last thing I was going to say, going back to identity quickly, is that for me, like to actually think about the parts of my personality and my nature that made me a good nurse, those things are still there if I'm not a nurse. And I would venture to all of our listeners who are struggling with that to like think about what those good qualities you have are that made you a good nurse. Your compassion, your listening skills, your ingenuity, your intellect, your resourcefulness, whatever those qualities are, those aren't bound to nursing or whatever the other profession is. Those are qualities that exist within us as human beings. Yeah,
and let's be real. I mean, the way things are going in the world now, and I remember being warned about this when I was younger, but it's not the same anymore, where you go into a profession and expect to practice that for X amount of years. I mean, it hasn't been like that for a long time, right? You're still getting baby boomers are kind of they'll be the last ones who kind of finish with that system. And I think it'll be, I mean, I can't tell you how many, I've had many different jobs, even in pharmacy. I've worked all over the place. Like I never am in one place for like two and a half years, usually maximum.
Yeah.
And I just don't, given the job market, and I think if you have the desire to learn right now and you want to try something new, that is definitely in your favor. It's probably the best time of my life for trying something new. So,
oh yeah, same.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah. So food for thought there. That again, there are different ways to do it. For me, after a year and a half of everything I've been through and being through the machine and kind of being spit out the other side of it, and a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety and worry and uncertainty. This is where I came to, and I, again, and I've talked about this before too, that it's always so telling to me how I feel when I pay attention to how I feel during these decisions. Like, what does my body feel like as I'm making whatever decision or saying whatever it is that I'm gonna say? As I, fired off these multiple emails, and I had to, send several emails of confirmation to various parties at play here that this was my actual decision and that I was saying this not under duress and that it was all on the up and up, that I was wanting to give up my license. I finished it and I felt really, really good. And I woke up the next morning, and that was the first morning I didn't have to log in and do the monitoring. And I thought, no, this makes sense. Yeah. This makes sense for me right now.
I completely agree. And we've talked about how it's easier to see other people's problems, and you've got a different perspective when you're not that person and everything. But man, I don't think you could have done anything better. Like it's a rare thing to see. And I do agree with you that it's the right decision. And so how does that work? You basically emailed a bunch of people. That's how you disperse that information?
Correct. Yeah.
Did you get some interesting responses?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. So I in terms of the monitoring company, I got a very kind, supportive statement back from the union. Very much the same. They kind of really wanted me to say, no, this is my decision. I stand by it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah,
I think that the particular person I had been interacting with knew that I was heading that way. She was the person I had been interacting with several months prior, and so in that last episode, I mentioned her that she was aware that I was kind of at the end of the road. And from my governing body, I had to send 2 emails before I got a response. And then the response was worded, the response was directed to my union, referring to me as Mr. Williams. It was not even responding to me directly. And I thought, to me, that really summed it up. I've sent 2 emails telling you what I'm doing, and the response went to the union about me and what it would look like for me if I ever wanted to come back.
Yeah. How much more mechanical? How less? I mean, that there's no humanity there whatsoever.
Right. And I left it. I left it at that. But I thought, I sent you 2 emails by name, and I get a response that went, directed at someone else. It's like if you asked me a question and I looked, over there to, tell the tree in my yard the answer. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. But it felt emblematic of how I have felt at different points in this process. So I kind of chuckled and let it go.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a couple things about what you're leaning towards as far as possible options. Do you want to give us kind of an idea of what you're thinking?
There's still so much that's up in the air for me, but for the immediate, I would love to continue to work with people and with youth or with people who are struggling. So there's an abundance of jobs within the community services nonprofit sector right now that interest me, that I've got some interviews and leads on. So I hope to follow that. And then probably will up my education at some point and do some things to sort of add to my resume and add to my experience and value. And yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to last long before somebody grabs you and gets you involved in something. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch. And I have no doubt that it's going to go well for you. But yeah, that's awesome, man. I'm so glad that I was able to be, a part of this part of your story to kind of watch it unfold. And because I've seen some weird ones for sure. And that one was up there. Some really bizarre twists, and yeah, very interesting. So that's where Corey's at, and we'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, until the next Corey update.
Until the next Corey update. Yeah, who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, thank you.